Arthur's family truth. My daughter left her room after 3 years, and what she told me saved my life. Her name is Cora. She's mine in every way that matters, even though I didn't raise her from birth. Her mother died bringing her into the world, and somewhere along the line she became the most important person in it. I need you to hold on to that before I tell you the rest. Sandra left on a Friday morning in February. Pharmaceutical conference, she said. 3 days in Cincinnati, presentations and networking dinners. She moved through the house the way she always did, efficiently, with a kind of practiced calm that I had spent 9 years mistaking for steadiness. Her luggage was by the door before I came downstairs. Coffee was already set up, a list on the kitchen counter. She paused in the hallway when she heard me on the stairs. "You'll be all right? I can ask someone to check in." "We'll be fine," I said. "Cora's in her room." Nothing changes in 3 days. Something moved across Sandra's face. Quick enough that I told myself I'd imagined it. She kissed my cheek, picked up her bag, and walked out. I'd been struggling for 18 months by then. The fatigue had started gradually, the kind of tired you chalk up to age and years of physical work catching up with you. I'd put in 28 years as a union electrician. My body had earned the right to complain. But this was different. Some mornings I sat on the edge of the bed and couldn't make myself stand for 10 minutes. My joints ached. My thinking felt like it was moving through water. Patrick Webb, my doctor, had run tests. Nothing definitive came back. Stress, he said. Overexertion. A natural decline. 3 months ago, he'd added supplements to my routine. Sandra made sure I took them every morning without fail. The blue ones especially, she reminded me. Every single day, I poured my coffee. It tasted off. Everything had tasted off for months, and I'd stopped noticing that I'd stopped noticing. I settled into my home office chair, opened my laptop, and tried to find a way into the consulting work I hadn't been able to concentrate on in weeks. That's when I heard the knock, not from outside, from the hallway inside the house, from the direction of the stairs. My hand stopped on the keyboard. Cora hadn't left her room in 3 years. Not since she was 14, when a counselor named Diane Carr, a colleague of Sandra's, had diagnosed her with severe social anxiety and agoraphobia. We left meals on a tray outside her door. We communicated by text, and she rarely replied. Sandra managed most of the contact, bringing Cora her therapy materials and relaying updates. I told myself this was just how it was, that some people needed more time, that the important thing was not to push. The knock came again. "Dad, can I come in?" Her voice in person, I hadn't heard it that way in over a year. "Of course," I said. The door opened and I didn't recognize her at first, not because she'd changed, but because the image I'd been holding of her was wrong. The girl I'd been picturing was pale and withdrawn, the fragile shape I'd glimpsed on occasional video calls. The person standing in my doorway was something else entirely. Cora stood straight. Dark jeans, a hoodie, her hair pulled back. She looked healthy. Her eyes were clear and focused in a way I hadn't seen since she was young. She was holding a hard drive in one hand and a thick folder in the other. "How are you, Dad?" Not a question. An assessment. "We have 48 hours, she said. "I need you to listen to everything I'm about to tell you, and I need you to trust me." She closed the door behind her and moved to my desk like she'd done it 100 times. I've been able to walk and leave my room for 3 years. I never had agoraphobia. I've been pretending. I asked her to slow down. She didn't. She pulled a chair across from me and told me that 3 years ago, 2 weeks before my mother Eleanor died, Eleanor had driven to the house while I was at work. She and Sandra had an argument. Cora heard it from upstairs. Eleanor had accused Sandra of having an affair. She'd seen Sandra with another man at a restaurant. Sandra told her to mind her own business or she would regret it. 2 weeks later, Eleanor was dead, acute myocardial infarction, 71 years old. I'd been devastated. I'd also never questioned it for a single moment. Cora set a printed document on the desk in front of me. "This is Grandma Eleanor's preliminary toxicology report, the one that wasn't included in the final filing." I picked it up. One line was highlighted in yellow. "Elevated levels of thallium detected in blood samples. Further analysis recommended." Thallium, Cora explained, is a poison. It causes cardiac events and organ failure. It mimics natural death well enough that a doctor who isn't looking for it won't find it. She opened her laptop. At 14 years old, after Eleanor's funeral, Cora had started looking. She'd learned to access Sandra's phone remotely. She'd installed a keylogger on Sandra's laptop. She'd ordered books on digital forensics through Maria, our housekeeper, who picked them up during her regular shopping runs. She'd spent 3 years building a case the way someone builds a case when they know no one will believe them without one. The text messages between Sandra and Patrick Webb went back 4 years. The affair had started shortly after I named Sandra as the sole beneficiary of my life insurance policy. $1,840,000. This could be fabricated, I said. My voice came out flat, like it belonged to someone else. I thought you'd say that. She opened a video file. The footage was from a camera she'd installed inside our bathroom medicine cabinet 8 months ago. The timestamp was from a Tuesday evening, 5 weeks after Webb had put me on the supplements. The video showed Sandra entering our master bathroom, opening the cabinet, removing my supplement bottle, producing a small vial from her coat pocket, adding drops of clear liquid, shaking the bottle, returning it to the shelf. I made it to the bathroom off my home office before I was sick. When I came back, Cora was still at my desk. She didn't look away. She didn't soften what came next. The supplements contained thallium acetate in low doses. The symptoms I'd been experiencing, the fatigue, the muscle weakness, the mental fog I'd been attributing to age and stress, were consistent with slow poisoning. Prolonged exposure causes organ failure that presents as natural illness, especially if the attending physician is already documenting a history of declining health. Patrick Webb had been falsifying my medical records. Diane Carr had fabricated Cora's diagnosis to isolate her, to make her an unreliable witness, to ensure that if something happened to me, Sandra would control Cora's inheritance until she turned 25, 8 more years of uncontested access. My prenuptial agreement left Sandra almost nothing in a divorce. If I died, she received everything. The insurance, the house, $312,000 in my name, deed recorded in Westerville, my retirement accounts of roughly $187,000, my consulting income, my share of everything I'd built. She had also taken out a second mortgage on the house for $94,500 without my knowledge, my signature forged. I asked Cora why she hadn't come to me sooner. The moment the words left my mouth, I understood the answer. Sandra was always there, Cora said. She controlled what you saw and heard. If I'd accused her directly, Diane Carr would have had me institutionalized, so I made myself invisible instead. She'd rigged a rope ladder from her bedroom window. She left at night when I was asleep and Sandra was at one of her many evening commitments. She photographed Sandra and Webb together across months and locations. She interviewed Eleanor's neighbors. Several of them remembered Sandra's car in Eleanor's driveway the morning before she died. One of them remembered seeing Sandra leave with something from Eleanor's kitchen. Physical copies of everything were stored in Unit 318 at Secure Space on Morse Road. Rented under Maria's name. Maria, Cora told me, had a degree in criminal justice from Mexico. She had worked as a police investigator before immigrating. She'd recognized the signs of poisoning in me 6 months ago and approached Cora. Since then, she'd been diluting the thallium in my supplements when she could. When Sandra increased the dosage, Maria increased her interventions. She saved your life more than once, Cora said. I thought about the past 6 months, the small acts of attention I'd mistaken for ordinary kindness, Maria insisting on making my coffee herself, deflecting Sandra's offers to prepare my food, the small adjustments I'd barely registered. She'd been running interference for half a year without me knowing there was anything to interfere with. The next morning, Maria arrived early and hugged me. Not the polite nod she gave at the door every other day. A real hug. She said she was glad I finally knew. The 3 of us drove to Westerville Family Medicine. Cora had made the appointment under a different name and paid cash. Dr. Patricia Holt was a sharp woman who listened to everything Cora laid out without interrupting. She took blood, urine, and hair samples. Hair, she explained, shows poisoning across time, not just what's in the system now, but what's been there for months. While we waited for results, Cora opened her laptop and walked me through the financial documentation. Sandra's forged signature on the second mortgage. Forged signature on documents increasing my insurance payout. Email chains between Sandra and Webb discussing retirement accounts, timelines, the Cayman Islands. Sandra's first husband, Gerald Moss, had died of a heart attack 6 years ago. She'd inherited his assets, used them to invest in my business, which is how we met. Dr. Holt returned with preliminary results. Her expression told me before she spoke. Dangerously elevated thallium levels. She would be filing a mandatory report with the Ohio Health Authority and the Columbus Police Bureau. She told me, with measured care, that I was lucky to be alive. Much longer on that dosage, and I would have faced complete renal failure. We needed to begin chelation therapy immediately. She handed me a printed report. "This," she said, "is attempted murder." Monday morning, I put on my best suit. Cora had told me to look like the person I was, not the sick man I'd become. At Midwest Federal Bank in Westerville, I presented my ID and marriage certificate and requested access to safety deposit box 3194, listed under both our names. I didn't have a key. Sandra had kept it, and the bank drilled it open without ceremony. Standard procedure. There was a fee. The officer led us to a private viewing room and left us alone. Cora began documenting before I touched anything. Inside the box, a ledger, payments to someone named Roy Slater, recorded by date and amount, beside each entry a name: Eleanor Brewer, Gerald Moss, Howard Carr. Howard Carr was Diane Carr's husband. He had died of sudden cardiac failure the previous year, at 42. Diane Carr had inherited his medical practice. There were also pharmaceutical-grade vials with chemical formulas on the labels. Photographs: Sandra with Webb, Sandra with Diane Carr, all three of them together at what appeared to be a celebration, and at the bottom of the box, a burner phone. Cora turned it on. The message history covered my treatment in precise detail, updates on my health, complaints that I was taking too long. In one exchange, there was a message that read, "Roy says he can make it look like a suicide if the other approach doesn't work soon, but that's messier." 2 more months. Roy Slater, Cora said, was connected to 6 suspicious deaths across Ohio and neighboring states. She had been tracking him for a year. She had documentation going back 11 months. We boxed the contents carefully. Then we drove to the Columbus Police Bureau and asked for Detective Carol Hines. Hines had recording equipment running when we arrived. She had been in contact with Cora for 5 months. We sat for 4 hours. Cora presented the evidence in sequence: digital files, recordings, photographs, financial documents, the chain of custody she'd maintained across 3 years. I provided the medical records and Dr. Holt's preliminary report. We presented the safety deposit box contents. At the end of it, Detective Hines picked up her phone and called the district attorney. There were grounds for arrest warrants for Sandra Brewer, Patrick Webb, and Diane Carr. Roy Slater would be brought in separately. Some of the digitally obtained recordings might face admissibility challenges, Hines explained, but the medical documentation was incontestable. The safety deposit box contents were incontestable. Eleanor Brewer's body could be exhumed and tested through proper legal channels. She arranged protective custody for us that evening. We stayed at Maria's house in southeast Columbus, and I sat in a chair by the window and tried to understand how 9 years of a life I thought I was living could have been something else entirely. The arrests were on the evening news. Sandra Brewer, Patrick Webb, Diane Carr. A reporter used the phrase murder for hire scheme and mentioned multiple victims across 2 states. The camera cut to the exterior of the Columbus Police Bureau, then to a courthouse steps shot, then to a spokesperson reading from a prepared statement. I watched it from a chair in Maria's living room in southeast Columbus and tried to locate myself inside what I was seeing. It had my name in it, my house, my wife's face in a booking photo on the lower third of the screen, and yet it felt like something that had happened to someone else, reported at a remove I couldn't close. My phone rang, Sandra's number. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 30 seconds long. The tone was the one she used when she'd asked for something twice already and didn't expect to have to ask a third time. Calm, flat, completely controlled. "Alan, I don't know what lies they've told you, but you need to get me out of here. I'm your wife. We need to stand together. Call me back immediately." No fear, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the deposit box, the ledger, the vials, the burner phone, or any of the rest of it. Just the expectation, unchanged, unshaken, even from a jail phone, that I would hear her voice and do what she said. That whatever I had seen and whatever I had done would dissolve in the face of her authority over me. I listened to it once. Then I deleted it and put the phone face down on the table. Cora was watching me from the doorway. She had a mug in each hand and was holding one out in my direction without saying anything, which was exactly what I needed from another person at that moment, presence without pressure. "You okay?" she said, when I still hadn't moved. "I don't know what I am," I said, which was the truth, angry in a way that didn't have a shape yet, hollowed out in a way I didn't have a word for it, grateful, aware of it, the way you're aware of something large standing very close to you, that I was sitting in a chair in a warm room instead of whatever came next if she hadn't knocked on my door 4 days ago. She crossed the room and sat down next to me. I put my arm around her. She let me. We sat there in Maria's living room and watched the news cycle move on to something else, and neither of us said anything for a long time. Eleanor Brewer's body was exhumed 3 weeks after the arrests. The results confirmed what Cora's preliminary report had indicated. Thallium poisoning consistent with the timeline of Eleanor's final weeks and the symptoms her neighbors had described in the months before her death. The official cause of death that had been filed, acute myocardial infarction, was revised. The record was corrected. My mother's name was finally attached to the truth of what had happened to her, which was the least the record could do, and the most I was going to get from a piece of paper. Gerald Moss's death was reopened. Howard Carr's death was reopened. Thallium poisoning, 3 murders, 1 attempted murder. Financial fraud across multiple accounts. Conspiracy with a documented chain of communication, a hired intermediary, and a safety deposit box full of evidence that Sandra had apparently kept because she had never once considered that anyone would look. Roy Slater accepted a plea agreement. 36 years in exchange for testimony against his employers. In the proceedings that followed, he confirmed the sequence of events the burner phone messages had already outlined, that Sandra had made first contact through an intermediary 2 years before Cora knocked on my door, that Webb had coordinated with him on the medical timeline, and that my death had been moved forward twice in the preceding 4 months because the poisoning was progressing more slowly than expected. He had been told to wait. He had been waiting. The trial began 7 months after the arrests. I testified first. I sat in the witness box in a courthouse in Columbus and told a jury of 12 people about my marriage, about the house in Westerville I'd owned for 14 years, about the woman I'd married 9 years ago who moved through every room with a practiced efficiency I had spent nearly a decade interpreting as competence and care. I told them about the 18 months, the fatigue that arrived gradually and then didn't leave the mornings. I sat on the edge of the bed, unable to make myself stand. The ache in my joints, the fog in my thinking, the way everything I ate and drank had started to taste off. A detail I had stopped noticing I was noticing. I told them about Patrick Webb telling me, appointment after appointment, that the tests were inconclusive, that it was stress, that a man who had spent 28 years doing physical work should expect his body to start presenting a bill. I told them about the supplements Webb prescribed 3 months before any of this came apart, about Sandra placing the bottle next to my coffee every morning without fail, about the blue ones especially every single day. The medical experts who followed me explained what I had been too close to see clearly. They described what thallium does to the human body over time, how it accumulates in tissue, how it mimics the presentation of organ failure from natural causes, how the dosage found in my system at Dr. Holt's clinic corresponded precisely to the timeline of my symptoms. They explained the gap between my actual laboratory results and the records Webb had filed under my name, which documented a patient in gradual systemic decline from causes that were, according to those records, internal and age-related and unrelated to anything outside his own body. One set of records said one thing. My blood, my hair, and my tissue samples said another. The distance between those two accounts represented the margin Sandra had been operating in. The space between what the official record showed and what was actually happening, maintained carefully over months, tended the way you tend something you plan to harvest. Then Cora took the stand. She was 18 by then, legally an adult, which the prosecution had noted in pretrial filings as relevant to how her testimony would be received and what credibility protections applied. She had been in therapy for 6 months, twice a week, consistently, working with someone who specialized in trauma responses in adolescents who had been placed under sustained high-stress conditions. She'd told me once, over Sunday dinner, that the hardest part wasn't processing what Sandra had done. It was learning to stop running the perimeter, to sit in a room without cataloging the exits. But when she sat in the witness box, none of that showed. She was composed in a way that wasn't performed. She was steady and precise and spoke at a pace that left no room for misinterpretation. She walked the jury through 3 years of work. She explained how she had taught herself digital forensics from library books that Maria picked up for her on shopping runs, never specifying the reason. She explained the keylogger, the remote phone access, the documentation protocols she had developed to ensure the evidence she was collecting would hold up to legal scrutiny. Protocols she had researched specifically because she understood at 14 that the first thing anyone would do when she came forward was look for a reason not to believe her. She explained the rope ladder, the night trips, the months of photographing Sandra and Webb together across locations. She explained Unit 318 at Secure Space on Morse Road, and the backup copies she had distributed to 3 attorneys and 2 journalists under agreements that would trigger automatic disclosure if she or I failed to check in by a specified date. She had built the case the way you build something meant to outlast you. The defense came at her in 3 directions. First, she was mentally unstable, and the jury should weigh her testimony accordingly. They cited Diane Carr's diagnosis, the same diagnosis Carr had fabricated specifically to establish Cora as an unreliable witness, a fact the prosecution addressed directly by presenting Carr's own communications describing the process of creating that record. Second, the digital evidence had been obtained illegally and could not be verified as unmanipulated. Third, no teenager acting alone could have produced what was being presented, which meant either she had significant adult help she wasn't disclosing, or the evidence had been constructed by parties with a motive to destroy Sandra's life. Detective Carol Hines testified that she had been conducting a parallel investigation for 5 months before the arrests, independently verifying each piece of evidence Cora had provided. She had confirmed the digital files against separate records obtained through proper legal channels. She had tracked Roy Slater's movements against the dates in the ledger. She had interviewed Eleanor Brewer's neighbors herself. The safety deposit box contents had been collected under legal procedure, witnessed and logged by a Midwest federal bank officer, with an unbroken chain of custody from the moment the drill touched the lock. The medical documentation from Dr. Patricia Holt was independently corroborated by 2 additional physicians the prosecution had retained as experts. The exhumation results had been produced by the Franklin County Medical Examiner's Office. Every piece of evidence the defense suggested might be fabricated had an independent institutional verification standing behind it. And then the prosecution played the recordings from the burner phone. Sandra and Webb discussing my treatment schedule in the flat managerial language of people managing a project, the updates on my health phrased as progress reports, the complaints in 2 separate exchanges that I was taking longer than projected, the revised timelines, Diane Carr in a message thread of her own describing the process of filing Cora's diagnosis with the professional satisfaction of someone who had done a difficult job well. All 3 of them, in their own words, documented across months, saying what they had planned and what they had done and what they expected to do next. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Sandra Brewer, guilty on 3 counts of murder in the first degree, 1 count of attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, life without parole. Patrick Webb, guilty on 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, 1 count of attempted murder in the first degree, fraud, falsifying medical records, 32 years. Diane Carr, guilty on conspiracy, fraud, professional fraud, falsifying psychological records used in furtherance of a criminal conspiracy, 17 years. The courtroom was loud in the way large rooms get loud when something that has been suspended finally comes down. I heard it from inside, a specific kind of stillness that I have not been able to fully describe to anyone who asks. Not relief, exactly, not triumph. Something more like the return of a pressure I hadn't known I was living under, the restoration of a baseline I'd forgotten existed. Cora was sitting beside me. I felt her exhale, a long, slow, complete breath that had apparently been compressed for 3 years, waiting for a moment it was safe to release. She put her head against my shoulder and cried quietly, steadily, the way you cry when something is over and the being over of it is itself what's finally too much to carry. Not grief, not sadness. The specific weight of a thing put down after being held long past the point of comfort. I held on and didn't say anything, because there was nothing I could say that would be adequate to what she had done. A year has passed. Cora is at Columbus State, studying forensic psychology. She sees her therapist twice a week and has since the arrests. She has friends, real ones, people who knew her before they knew the story, and a few who came after and stayed anyway. She talks about her coursework with the focused interest of someone who has found the shape of what she's for. She wants to work in behavioral analysis, specifically in cases involving coercive control and long-term domestic abuse patterns. I believe she will. I believe she will be exceptional at it. The chelation therapy worked well. Most of the thallium has been cleared from my system. There is some residual nerve damage in my hands, a tremor on cold mornings, occasional weakness when I'm tired, that my doctors have told me may be permanent. I've adjusted. I still do part-time electrical consulting, though I grip tools differently now. It is a small accommodation to still being here to make it. Maria is my office manager. It is, without question, a better use of her than the position she held for 4 years in my house. She is organized in the way that people are organized when they have spent years tracking multiple moving systems simultaneously without anyone noticing. She reads situations faster than anyone I've worked with. The clients like her. She does not waste time. Eleanor Brewer's death certificate has been corrected. Gerald Moss's family received confirmation of what they had been told was a natural death. Howard Carr's family has the same. Restitution from Sandra's seized assets was distributed across the 3 families. It doesn't restore anything that was taken. It is an acknowledgement from the legal system that something was taken, which is not nothing. Every Sunday, Cora and I have dinner. We sit across from each other at a table in a restaurant. Neither of us has any particular attachment to, and we talk about her classes and my work and the small accumulation of ordinary events that makes up a life when nothing is being actively dismantled. Sometimes I look at her and try to fully hold what she chose to do. She was 14 years old when she understood the situation. She was 14 when she calculated that the only path that had any chance of working was one she would have to build and walk entirely alone, in secret, over years, with no guarantee that anyone would believe her when she was done. She gave up 3 years, not in the abstract sense, not in the sense of something being difficult or costly, but in the specific, irreversible sense of time that passed while other people her age were doing other things. Friends she didn't make, experiences she didn't have. The ordinary passage of an adolescence that she had to watch from behind a closed door, because closing that door was the only way to stay invisible long enough to finish what she'd started. She did that for me. If I carry anything forward from this, it is the distinction between trust and abdication. I trusted Sandra completely. I had confused those 2 things, complete trust and love, for 9 years, and the confusion had cost me nearly everything. What complete trust actually meant in practice was that I had handed one person control over my medical care, my daughter's treatment, and our finances, and had never once examined whether what she told me corresponded to what was actually happening. I had decided, somewhere I can no longer locate, that to question anything was a form of disloyalty. That loving someone well meant accepting their account of every situation without independent verification. Cora never made that decision. She loved me, and she looked anyway. She built a case because she understood that love without clarity is not protection, it's just exposure with a warmer name. She knocked on my door with a hard drive and a folder and 3 years of work and said, "I need you to trust me." I did. That's why I'm still here. There are situations in which the person with the clearest view of a danger is also the person with the least institutional credibility to report it, too young, too isolated, too thoroughly pre-categorized as unreliable by the people the danger is coming from. When that happens, the instinct of the people around them is often to explain the account away rather than examine it. The cost of that instinct in cases where the account is accurate compounds over time in ways that are worth sitting with.